All right, on the second episode, Adi, following up what we talked about on the last week, also we talked about Pemilu, which is presidential election of Indonesia. Now, just a follow up from there, a few days before the election, there is a documentary, a short documentary, almost 2 hours, by independent journalists and non-journalists. I think lawyers that post up a video on YouTube. You might, some of you, our listeners, might have seen this video called "Dirty Votes." So within one day, it garner around what 4 or 6 million views. So it's quite impressive. Even though if you think about it, like Indonesia has 200 more than 200 millions voters. But what I want to highlight is the first one is that this video expose what are some of the how Jokowi misuse his power to gain a leverage in this current election. But if you look at all the things that they try to expose, these are in comparison with Malaysia, it's just a minor things because these are the things that using government assets to do a campaign, political campaign, which is not allowed. But hey, in Malaysia, we don't even know what kind of airplane that our politicians that they use to fly to their respective venues. In Indonesia, they even go the deepest level of who on the airplane, why they are chartering it, if they're chartering it, like how much they're paying, if they don't charter, is it sponsored, if it's sponsored, like why this generous billionaire or whoever try to sponsor, do they have an interest in the political party. So these are the things that being discussed in the vote. So I think it's quite impressive to see how they this investigative journalism are doing in Indonesia. Another thing that I would like to remind our view listeners and viewers about the vote is that how they by chronologically what happened in the courts when Gibran was actually just a few months before was actually illegal to run for vice president, and during the September the hearing, the court was allow him to run for vice presidential election. So this is they break it down what happened on that day. On the same day, turns out that when the dissenting judges given their results on the same day after lunch hour, they're very they even use the analogy of like before lunch it was like different, but after lunch it's a different result. So it becomes a meme to the journalists in Indonesia that hey, what happened during lunch? So something happened in those short window that as we know, the chief judge of constitutional court in Indonesia, not anymore, but at that time was Jokowi's brother-in-law, Anwar Usman. So this guy actually spearheaded single-handedly helped Gibran to be in the run for vice president of election. Another that another thing that we should mention also that Jokowi's son-in-law, which is Medan's mayor, help them in terms of political campaign. So we have another people already in office to help Gibran run for presidential. And now, as we see it, as the data coming in, even though official result only be in 20th of March, Prabowo Gibran leading the count, and Gibran is very pretty much 99% going to be vice president of Indonesia. So it will be very first time for Indonesia to have a very young vice president of Indonesia at the age of 36, 37. So that's an impressive well, the word impressive maybe too positive to describe the whole situation, because according to dirty votes, these are the miracle that happened. All these invisible hands that worked their way so that Gibran can contest in this election. And now look what happened. It's they call it, if it's over 50% votes, it's a landslide win for Prabowo and Gibran. So I think that's what uh, I can bring all of our listeners up to speed now. And then this is almost a week after election. Anis is the only one that won uh, like a province, which is in Aceh and also in some parts of small parts of Sumatra. Ganjar, which is supported by PDIP, which is Jokowi's party, failed to win any province. So that's how people say, like, how that happened. To give some perspective to our listeners, PDP is like Barisan Nasional pre 2018. No one would imagine they would be facing things like this, but apparently, political figure is stronger than ideological party in Indonesia. And if you see as well, in Jakarta province, Anies and Prabowo are neck to neck. Prabowo never been a governor of any Jakarta's or West or Java or East Java, but he is neck to neck with the previous Jakarta governor Anies Baswedan. And people dissect this result and see that by why they are neck to neck, because metropolitan is the demography is very complex. It's a mixture of education level, age, and income groups. So this is again, Adi, if you want to compare in Malaysia, it's, I think it's quite the same. In city, you can find conservative Malay in certain numbers of very liberal area, and vice versa. So doesn't mean that it's high income, like maybe like Petaling Jaya or Ampang is a confirmed win for the Liberal Party, but also it could go like as we see, Titi Wangsa goes to Datuk Johari Datuk Johari Ghani. So that's how we can see that city voters is very complex due to these demographic reasons. And another thing, going back to the PDIP loss, and another I read on Twitter the other day that someone says that how on earth PDIP can lose in Bali Island. Bali PDIP never lost in Bali since 1998. Can you imagine that? That's almost Adi's age here. So that's how long PDIP was in rule there. By the way, I'm talking about presidential election. Legislative election, yes, they still garner the most votes, but that's not presidential election. Presidential election is the focus now, and they lost in Bali. These are the fortress of PDIP, and the loss. So that's another takeaway from this election. Last but never least is a trend that we see in Southeast Asia. Adi. This is I don't know. I would like to ask you about this. Anwar in Malaysia. This is a figure that very active in 90s, now become prime minister. Marcos, from his father reign, now become Marcos Junior. Now is the president of Philippines. And now Prabowo, military general, very infamously active in the 90s, now become president of Indonesia. Are we living in the 90s, Adi? What do you think about this current trend that we have?
Okay, I'll address that last question you brought up when it comes to are we in the 90s. But first, I want to say if we are, I hope we're not going to experience another financial crisis. I hope that's
Ah,
not a prophecy of that of a future crisis that's incoming. Um, I think here to say that first is that it's sort of like a return of a lot of elements of the old guard here. you can say Anwar as a reformer, you can say that he's a fresh face, but we have to go back and see his entire career came together with the backing of Mahathir. Anwar was principally the engineer for many of Mahathir's social policies. Like when people like to bring up the rise of more, how do you say, conservative elements in terms of Muslim voters, we have to remember who was the one that, of course, Mahathir was the mastermind, but who was the enabler, who was the engineer and architect? It was Anwar Ibrahim. In a way, his career goes back very, very far back, since even the 80s, and you can even see during the 70s, or when he was a student, he was already getting himself involved in politics here. It is, you cannot deny he's part of the old guard here of politicians. He was an UMNO man, so he does represent the old guard of UMNO politicians at this point. So now that we have Prabowo becoming president here, who himself is also a veteran, who has also established his political career way before he was even prominent, from the 90s and 80s, and having being the son-in-law to former autocrats, right, whose political careers also extends even further back. And now Philippines, we have someone who is the scion of infamous, how do you say, a family dynasty itself as well, and bringing back as well Thailand. We have the conservative parties also in charge here, and an old politician himself who comes from that old guard. So this is how I would
Mhm.
describe Southeast Asian politics right now. It's a resurgence of the old guard here, of veteran old politicians who still have chances to win elections. It shows that they still have a huge role to play, and they have influence that is definitely hard to contend with here. So this kind of paints a picture that young leaders, right, unless they have some kind of legacy backing, it's very difficult for them to actually establish themselves in politics. So if you want to say a young leader can emerge out of, let's say, Malaysia's next political cycle, that would only be because he would have some kind of backing from the old guards who still control much of the political landscape in Southeast Asia. It seems that it goes to show that the status quo is something that we are very comfortable with. We're not into radical changes or even reforms, like big major reforms in terms of the age demographic or of the our legislature. So that is one thing I'll give out there as a takeaway here. And not to mention that it's not like in the West where we see a lot of like young rising politicians suddenly coming up to the bat here, coming up to the fold of leadership. But I would also make an argument that in a lot of Western countries as well, a lot of leaders have received the positions they have, won the positions they have because of legacy backing as well. So this is a huge argument that has been raging, that most of the decisions are being made by the top 1%, even and people who are in retirement age, essentially. So this comes to an issue of like, brings up the conversation: should there be a limit to age in running running political office? Mahdi made a marvelous comeback with his second time as prime minister. So this is what I can take away looking at all these results here: is legacy, a status quo, age. It still makes a huge difference in terms of shaping the political landscape and having an effect on voters. No matter what we say about we need young leaders, right? The voting patterns still illustrate uh, comfortability with people who has been there for a very, very long time. So that is, like you said, it's the 90s, but in a way we never grew out of the 90s in a way, in terms of political development in that regard. Of course, parties, there's been change of parties here and there in Malaysia, um, or even in, let's say, the Philippines, but in a way, the people who are in that age group, that age bracket, that those cohorts there, they still hold a majority of power here. Now, okay, I'm just going to make it short as well, since you mentioned about how the Indonesian elections came with it a huge documentary. Dirty Votes is up to at least 9 million views right now,
Oh,
since it was,
wow.
yeah. So this kind of illustrates that Indonesia at one point was being hailed as taking a lot of steps forward in terms of the democratic process, but I somehow slipped back into somewhat of an autocratic or even like a kind of a situation here. If that documentary is to be believed, that people who are in power are able to manipulate certain procedures or certain aspects of the democratic process to make it move in their favor. Like for me, the biggest thing, like I mentioned last time, was that Jokowi had the constitution amended to pave way for his son to be the youngest vice president in Indonesia's history, and that puts him on course to potentially become a president in the future. So no, say what you want about dynasty building that Jokowi rejects, that seems to be the case here. The writing is on the wall, and you don't really need a documentary to kind of illustrate that point. Of course, it gives a more rounded understanding of it. But looking back even further, like the documentary mentioned that Kasang Pengarap, who was leader of Indonesian Solidarity Party, which is the more youth-centric political party in Indonesia, is helmed by Jokowi's youngest son. He is Jokowi's youngest son. He holds that position for a political party who targets the youth, young people. Uh, so the writing is on the wall as well, and it's not just the documentary saying this. Like Jokowi's former vice president, uh, Yusuf Kala, says a lot of what was there was true. And
Mhm.
now that we're seeing that, Anies Baswedan, who is formerly in Jokowi's government, who is going up against him. So there is signs here that Jokowi is putting his hands in almost every part of the political landscape here in Indonesia, over there in Indonesia. So I think we have to see how does Prabowo actually move forward with his when he becomes as president here. Will this just be how far will he continue Jokowi's legacy, or will he carve out his own path to establish himself? Since he's already established himself as this grandfather figure, like he's a grandfather to everyone in Indonesia. So he would definitely want to make a move to, how do you say, distinguish himself from Jokowi's administration. Of course, there will be certain things that Jokowi is still able to influence, such as the development of Nusantara in Kalimantan. But I think there will be some kind of dispute and some kind of how do you say, back and forth or tit for tat in trying in Jokowi still asserting his foothold that he's cultivated, and Prabowo trying to make himself more step out of, in a way, Jokowi's shadow, and also the political ambitions of Gibran and Anis will be continue. I don't think this will be the uh, I mean, in a way, he won't take this loss and quit. I think he will continue to become how do you say, a recurring figure in Indonesian politics. So now I think with this documentary putting, in a way, the administration on the back foot, the government, the party on the back foot, it would play sort of shift it into a defensive game for Jokowi's camp, for Jokowi's people. So that is what I can take away from the recent elections happening in Indonesia and the revelations brought about in this documentary.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people now in Indonesia says that Jokowi is the betrayer of reformasi that have been done in the what you talk about, like in the few decades ago. Uh, Jokowi was a furniture seller, and then Megawati gave a platform to him, and through PDIP, he become one of the most stalwart figure that political figure Indonesia ever produced, and as a as a mark to that, a celebration to that, Jokowi, even in his last year or as a president, he actually has around 70% of approval rating. So you don't see this a lot in third world country or any. advanced country anyway. So developed country, we don't hear this often, and this is very unique of Jokowi, that he is still popular even though he's no longer allowed to to contest as a president. Now, if the votes accusations are to be true, then we need to see that Jokowi now using his whole ability, all of his resources to create a dynasty, political dynasty in Indonesia, as we see Gibran now, the son-in-law also in Medan. These are the Jokowi's attempt to hold on to power in Indonesia, even though we might see that he, if Jokowi gonna pull a Putin move, because what Putin did when he was in the first tenure as a president of Russia, he actually gave way to his ally for one term, and then he come back, and then he becomes the president of Russia again. So you know, Prabowo is 72, 70-ish, and he has a problem with his left leg. He might not be running for a second term as president. He already run so many elections. I think he never missed an election in the last 10 years. So he is very adamant to be a president, and now he got it. I think 5 years will be enough for him. He doesn't want financial gain from it anyway. I think he just want to see himself sitting in the number one's office. So Jokowi is preparing, laying off his foundation to come back as Indonesia president, if I read his strategy correctly. So that's why he is not he tried to, because he has a lot at stake when he did this, like allowing his son or helping by the uncle of Gibran to be nominated in the vice presidential election. So why would you want to tarnish your reputation like this, right? Even though you no longer can be a president. So I think this is his way, like, okay, I'm gonna lose some reputation, maybe people in Jakarta, but people in Papua, people in Bali still know me as someone who developed Indonesia in a leap and bounds way, like like in a tremendous way. So I still hold on to that popular opinion, but at the same time, I'm gonna do what I think I'm gonna do, which is hold on to power, let Prabowo rule for another 5 years, and then I'm gonna come back because I'm still young. I'm younger than Prabowo, and Jokowi is, I think, less than 60 years old. So yeah, even in the 60s, I think, with his physique, I don't think he has a problem to run for another two election cycle. So I think this is where he's going, and political analysts in Indonesia uh, now concede that Jokowi is, yes, ha- impacted Indonesia in a lot of ways, in positive ways. But what he did is an act of betrayal to the whole Indonesia, because a part of his appeal is actually that he's not part of political elites in Indonesia. He's not he's not related to Prabowo by blood. He's not related to Megawati by blood. So all these uh, political elites in Indonesia, and now you have this furniture seller that wants to be president of Indonesia. Go ahead, Megawati said, and lo and behold, he did, and he completed two terms as president. So yeah, his uprising is a fairy tale. It's a wonderful story to be told, but I think Indonesia as a country, as a society, need to, like you said, need to see what's next. How Prabowo will continue his legacy. Well, Nusantara is just a very small fraction of it, but how will he uphold whatever he said in this election? Because he is seen as very someone is very like hardcore because he was part of the autocratic government in the past. So will he be that Prabowo, or he will be a new granddad figure Prabowo that he tried to display during this election? So that's, I think, number one question: how Indonesia can move forward, because the election is done. Anies and Ganjar should concede this election, and Prabowo already dancing, like he dances TikTok dance wherever he goes now to celebrate his winning, even though it was not confirmed 100% official. But the way that he dance and Gibran dance, I think they know they are going to be the next president and vice president.
Yeah, it kind of leaves a bit of taste in the mouth, considering how Jokowi was always seen as that man of the people. He had that kind of character, and he was associated as that humble individual from um, humble beginnings that was always pro the people. Uh, so it kind of leaves a bitter taste to know that this was what was happening behind the scenes here. That he has manipulated a few things to pave the way for his handpicked successor, or should I say, in the plural sense, because he has named Prabowo, then he named Ganja, now he puts up his son to be vice president. You know, making sure all bases are covered essentially, and that took a lot of political maneuvering, a lot of tampering with the democratic process. So that kind of mirrors like how when we here in Malaysia associate a lot of the politics here is that it's always being tempered with gerrymandering, with vote buying, and, you know, in a way, it's stuff that our prime minister has thought out to eradicate, or at least try to mitigate, to ensure that democracy is flourishing ideal here in Malaysia. So, in this sense, because Prabowo actually has always been very partial to Malaysia, he's always been very open to cooperating in Malaysia. How would our prime minister feel if the facts of 30 votes, the documentary, is to be true? Because Anwar went on the platform of eradicating corruption, dynasty building, or you know, all these old guard style politics. And if he wants to work with you know, a government that has been, how do you say, involving themselves in these kinds of practices, what kind of message would that send? Do we still stand for democratic processes when it's only convenient for us to say, but when somebody else does it, we just keep quiet because it is the excuse of that is their internal affairs here. We don't meddle. But you know, nowadays a lot of world leaders are trying to make their mark by making a statement on what other countries are doing. So what would the stance be for the pro democracy prime minister that we have, who's pro reforms as well? How would the tone be? Or would this be kept under the rug for Malaysia for the sake of cooperation that is more economically beneficial rather than setting out or laying out a moral message here? So that's a huge conundrum, and what kind of gives a better clarity into how the idea of progressivism and democratic transitions, how much of a priority that really is to our leaders in not just Malaysia, but for many democratic countries around the world, in the region, or around the world. So it kind of sets the tone here. It's a potential. It's setting up to set the tone, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's wraps up for our Pemilu episode, Indonesia president election episode. And coming up next, our different topic, which is we're going to talk about demographic in Sabah. Yeah, I think it's one of the ethnicity in Sabah that we want to talk about. So stay tuned.